Oh, okay. We're live. Welcome everybody. This is a stream on retro funding round 4, which is all about on-chain builders. We have some excellent on-chain builders with us today that we're going to chat with about the retro funding program. We are going to answer all of your questions, and most importantly, we're going to spread the positive, optimistic vibes. We have builders from Synthetics, Base Paint, Boost with us. I'll let them intro themselves. I'm Jonas. I'm contributing to retro funding at Optimism Unlimited, Fund Limited. I'll just popcorn it to the next person to introduce themselves. Zach, putting you on the spot.
Hey everybody, I'm Zach Herring, builder in the space, one of the co-founders of Base Paint, and a recipient of Retro Funding 3. So excited to be here.
You have to popcorn it to the next person.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, it's been a while. Bobby, why don't you go?
What's up, people? I'm Bobby. I work at Optimism along with Jonas. I'm here for moral support and hype and question asking. I will popcorn it over to Matt.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to struggle with the popcorn because I don't know everyone's names, but that doesn't matter. So, hey guys, I'm Matt, core contributor over at Synthetics. Help out across a wide array of things. You may know me from the Optimism Grants Council. I won't give an intro on Synthetics here, but we are a very vital builder across Optimism and across Base and Superchain and so on. So yeah, that's a bit about me. Really excited to be here in chat, and I will popcorn it over to. Let's see. I'm gonna hand it over to Brian, but I honestly don't know. Perfect. Look at
that. So hey everyone, I'm Brian. I'm a founder and contributor at Boost. We're building a distributed incentives network to make it easy for token holders to distribute ownership to the highest quality participants in crypto. So that's a bit about what we do.
Awesome. Thank you, squad. We are gathered here today because we have recently announced retro funding round 4, which is focused on on-chain builders, people who have deployed contracts, written code, shipped some form of impact that is measurable directly or indirectly on-chain. So retro funding has gone through a bunch of different shapes and sizes, and the theme for 2024 is getting more specific to give each round throughout the year a really targeted scope, and pairing it with a voting experience, a sign-up experience, a whole kind of like product through line that makes sense for that type of impact evaluation. So round 4 is the first one in 2024, again, focused on-chain builders. And since it was announced a couple of weeks ago, we have been getting a lot of questions online, in person, in the slew of messaging apps that we are beholden to these days about what retro funding round 4 is about. Basically, what does it mean to be an on-chain builder? What type of work is eligible? Why does it matter? All that sort of stuff. What is it like to sign up? When do you get to know about what's going into the round and what's not going into the round? All that good stuff. So purpose of this live stream today is to give you some first-hand information from folks who've participated in past rounds about how retro funding has supported their projects, sort of like some of their broader thinking and themes around why retro funding is exciting for them, and then some tactical advice for how to participate either in round 4 or in rounds beyond round 4. And we'll save some time at the end for questions that show up on Warpcast, on Twitter, basically on the threads, and make sure that we're getting a chance to address folks' specific questions as well. Are we ready? Feeling good? My thumbs don't show up in my virtual background. Anything to add, Mr. Jonas?
We had a special guest join late. Small Brain, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, yes, happy to be here. Very excited to talk about RPGF as well. Yeah, I'm Small Brain from Small Brain Games. We build fully on-chain games, which are games where the entire state is represented on a blockchain. Why? We're figuring it out. And specifically within that space, we build like casual, accessible, kind of social economic games and launch them quickly. And so previous things we've built are Words 3, which is this like fully on-chain word game where everybody's building words on top of each other on an infinite board, and there's like a market per letter. That'll actually relaunch with a crazy new mechanic on Redstone in the coming 2 weeks. We built this game called Draw Tech, which is like a play on r/place, where you're drawing things and incentivized to make good contributions. Built this game called Network States, built this game called Apes Gambit, worked on this project called Yonk, which is like you can send people payments unlocked by voice memos. So you only get my $100 if you listen to me out loud on your phone with no headphones right now. Crazy things like that. And a lot of it has been, I mean, we're fully grant funded. So a lot of it's, and the primary, one of the primary things there is retro PGF. So like, I think like doing this type of experimental stuff is one of the things that retro PGF has uniquely enabled. So anyways, very, very excited to have this chat and be here.
Amazing. Thank you, Spellbrain. Yeah, we'll kick it off. I mean, I think you just touched on the first question a bit, but basically I'm kind of curious to start at the top. How does retro funding affect your project? Like, how did participating in round 3 make a difference for where you're at now, where you want to go going forward, that kind of thing? And I guess I'll pass it over to Zach to kick us off.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, I think it's worth noting Base Paint was meant to go for like a week or two. I think that was kind of the intention, or felt like something fun to launch in kind of to celebrate Onchain Summer, and the fact that we're on day like 260. So I think first and foremost, Retro 3 really contributed to kind of like the sustainability of the project. People knew us better, like a lot better after RPGF 3. And so that the badge holders, basically people signaling that what we were building was a valuable contribution. It's a kind of project, culture, community, however you want to frame it. I think was like enough. It was enough of a signal for us to kind of continue to build out Base Paint in a bunch of different directions, on-chain rewards, building out kind of like the CC0 library of it, open sourcing. I think like most of the code. We still need to figure out how we're going to open source the front end, but like essentially RGPGF 3 allowing kind of like that vote of confidence gave us enough of a push to where we could like continue to build out on Base Paint. It was a big element of that, I would say.
Amazing. Yeah, that totally tracks, especially for a project that's small and in its early stages. It's like a pretty strong signal to keep going. Mm-hmm. What about you, Matt? I know that Synthetics is in a very different chapter in its growth and life cycle. Like, how did this compare to sort of Zach's experience?
Yeah, it's a very interesting one for Synthetics, because when you look at Synthetics, you're like, Synthetics is huge, Synthetics is funded. Why does a project the size of Synthetics even like need retro funding in any sort of way? And I'll be honest with you, I hadn't even, like, myself and core contributors at Synthetics, when we looked at applying, we were like, we really don't see ourselves as like fitting within, what Retro Public Goods funding had intended to do. And when we chatted with various community members and various foundation members and so on, and they had said like, hey, we think Synthetics should apply to this. And the way that they had described it to us and the way that we had come to accept it was that you really need to incentivize the largest builders on a chain, the builders that are driving sequencer revenue and that are making retro funding, sustainable for the long term. And the way that we really looked at it was that Synthetics isn't just this liquidity layer that like powers derivative apps. Like, yes, that's how a lot of people look at it, but Synthetics is also like a lifeblood and like a one of the largest communities on Optimism that has driven public goods across various realms. Like Synthetics contributors at the community level have been involved builders, have, brought on so many different communities, have onboarded, many of our ecosystem members across like, Quenta, across Polynomial, Lyra. We were some of the original folks to come over to Optimism. And we see this sustainability side of saying, hey, we really should look into rewarding the builders that are driving sequencer revenue and that are actually making all of this possible as a really critical part, of Synthetics applying. Obviously, it's very different in terms of Synthetics being sustainable, but we think it's the best path to pushing builders to build on Optimism, right? Like, that if you drive attention, if you drive traffic, if you drive sequencer revenue, and that to us is what impact is truly about, then you will be rewarded on Optimism. And that's a critical part, and that's one of the main reasons that synthetics and optimism have been so aligned from day one. But obviously, it's extremely different from what some of the other folks on this call will be, and obviously, we align a little bit more with regards to like the sequencer side and like this like larger builder side, and bringing in builders and bringing in capital and bringing in transactions that really drive the rest of optimism forward.
Yeah, amazing. There's a lot in there. I mentioned at the top, right? Like we're trying to design these individual rounds this year, and part of that's because the term impact is loaded, right? There's so many different types of behaviors, activities, contributions that count as impact to the collective. And so what Matt, you just talked about is in many ways the core focus of the on-chain build round. We're saying if you've created something that's driving revenue to the collective, onboarding users, increasing the overall transaction volume across the super chain, like these are many of the inputs that impact is about. And it can also be about contributions to the OP stack, or helping develop the governance system, or helping develop a robust developer tooling landscape like the rest of the rounds will this year. But separating out these rounds helps us sort of like speak directly to the folks in each bucket and each type of impact, and make sure that they understand their work is retro-fundable. So thank you for sharing that. Brian, what do you think? How has Rabbit Hole been impacted by retrofunding? How has the project kind of benefited?
So we first actually received, I guess one of the interesting things about Rabbit Hole or Boost, as what it's called now, is it requires actually tokens to be deposited inside of the protocol in order for it to actually have like usage itself, right? So it's kind of like you need to put the quarter in order for the thing to actually work. So of course you get this classic problem, this cold start, where you actually, where does the OP come from? It's instance, right? So we got the OP from one of the builder grants, and then use that to actually fuel growth for the rest of the ecosystem as well. And of course, because the way Boost works is that we're actually able to, or anyone's able to actually incentivize with any token, the actual growth of any project. So there was actually Boost being created for projects like Base Paint and projects like Synthetics to actually fuel those projects even further, right? And so it is kind of this, we call it the supercharger of sorts. We kind of talk supercharger for Superchain is another way of we kind of talk about it. And so when we actually received the Retro PGF for Retro PGF 3, we actually took that and actually made it so that we can incentivize users even more that align with the metrics that Retro PGF 4 is looking for. So in Retro PGF 4, it's all about bringing in new users, sequencer fees, block-based demand, returning users. So for us, it's how do we take those metrics and those goals and actually create a sub-program that meet those goals as well, to kind of align incentives between the projects themselves that we're trying to help grow and the Superchain stuff. We actually just launched a Boost Creator Fund to actually incentivize Boost creators to go drive as many mints as possible on the Superchain, especially quality users as well, who are on Farcaster or have repeated usage on Superchain. So for us, it's all about how do we make sure that as we're continuing to build on Optimism Superchain, that we can actually have that now put into how to actually fuel other projects being built with the same goals in mind. So this kind of just allows us to perpetuate that funding even more, to get to a point where we can build a much more sustainable way, where we're kind of able to actually help grow Superchain in a much more larger capacity.
Super cool. Like fractal growth all the way down. I think the last person we haven't heard from is Small Brain. How did retrofunding affect you guys?
Yeah, I feel like my answer is so much less thoughtful than everybody else's. Like the first time I heard of retrofunding was when when somebody was like, well, I think I was just nominated the first time in Retro PGF 2. Like, and then I woke up one morning and it was like, here's some OP token, and I was like, cool, you know. and obviously in three sat down and wrote the application. That's how I do it work. And so that was like honestly a huge surprise the first time it happened. Was totally not expecting it. And I think at that time it was like purely experimental land, and so that just helped like a little bit of validation. Like, okay, people think this is valuable and interesting, and it's worth spending time on. And I think the second thing it's enabled is like me to take a very, very experimental approach. And I think like in things, especially like fully on-chain gaming, where we don't know what we're doing yet, right? Like there isn't a playbook yet. Like there isn't any sort of PMF or thing that's worked yet that we're following. Like there's things that have kind of worked for niche audiences. Just like that freedom is really, really important, because I think other funding paths might lead to like a lot less of that freedom, which might lead to a lot less product success early on in something like this. And so I think like when previously, like fully on-chain games might have worked because people were hacking in their free time and eventually somebody found something. I think like things like retro PGF will make them work much, much faster because people can explore full time.
I'm really missing the emoji reacts on this website that we're at. I think Jonas has the next question. Over to you, sir.
Yes. Yeah, first off, great to hear those experiences. We often get questions from projects that are not sure if they want to apply, or if they want to apply, they're wondering if they're like best practices. Do you guys have any advice for projects that are looking to apply? Kicking it over to Zach, what do you think?
Yeah, I think my advice boils down to pre-launch and post-launch. I think on pre-launch, it's pretty standard product boot campy type advice, right? Like focus on minimum viable network, right? The least amount of coordination to make your product useful. You want to focus on what people are wanting. I think constantly asking yourself, does this need a blockchain, actually is a really helpful question in terms of reducing the scope and giving I don't know, just like kind of revealing like what it's actually useful for, and kind of executing against. I think those are just really useful design principles in terms of like when you're thinking about what to build. Post-launch, I think storytelling and narrative is really, really helpful. Actually, that's also really, really helpful pre-launch, but I think especially post-launch storytelling and narrative. I know RPGF4 has a deeper focus on on-chain metrics, which I think is great. But I also think that too many times we expect our products and the value that they deliver to be self-evident, right? What base paint isn't immediately obvious, right? We're working towards that. I think like a big part of how we're thinking about it now is like, how do we tell our story in as succinct a way as possible so that artists are coming in immediately grok kind of the value that they could potentially derive from this? How do we abstract away even more of the crypto-ness of it and make it more of like a natural Web 2 flow with maybe like some crypto railings underneath? How do we onboard like a lot of artists who wrote off NFTs in 2021, in my opinion, for a lot of good reasons, and reintroduce them to this as a powerful way to like create art together, collaborate, and potentially benefit? Those are all parts of storytelling, right? Like those are all things that we've kind of like a story that we started telling ourselves, that we're starting to kind of like think about how do we construct, how do we share that with other people? Because it does two things. Like one, it helps everyone what the value of the thing is that you're delivering into the space. And then two, it's really, really clarifying for you. So building out the story in the first place gives you kind of the idea of like, okay, this is actually what we're doing. This is what I care about. This is what we're doing. It gives you a North Star to start shooting for. And then essentially, as you tell that story, it clarifies for you, then it clarifies for the folks who are contributing, then it clarifies for the community, and then it starts clarifying for the folks outside of the community. So yeah, I would say like I obviously focus on-chain stuff, focus on building on-chain and bringing more of the economy on-chain on the OP stack. But I would also like strongly encourage that like have a really clear why. And a really succinct why that you can kind of share with other folks is really powerful, both in terms of who you're building for, what you're building, and I think it obviously really helps with the application that you're going to be writing for RGPGF4.
Great to hear that. It sounds like storytelling is important, but you're also just giving a bunch of advice on like how to max your impact, which is what we're all about. Kicking it over to Matt, you've been involved in optimism governance for a long time, seen lots of grants programs. What would be your advice to people getting started?
Yeah, so I think with this redesign, especially for like this round around on-chain builders, it's actually really straightforward. Like it is so simple to show your level of impact, given that you have impact. Like if you don't, if there's no demand for block space, if you don't have that side, this round is going to be hard for you to apply to, right? So what I would say is that if you're an existing project that is on Optimism, or let's go further, across the super chain, and is generating demand for block space, engaging with and keeping long-term and like high value users, high trust users, if you're an open source protocol, all these different things that are part of the criteria. If you are a protocol that is engaging users in that way, generating transactions, apply to the upcoming round. And really what you should be focusing on as part of this proposal is just laying out the data for folks to take a look at, right? Like, yes, in this round it's a little bit different. Citizens aren't going to be voting for projects individually. They're voting at this more like group level, which is obviously a bit of a change from the last one. But most of your work should just be taking the impact that you've had in the past and just displaying that across various dunes. And it doesn't have to just be like, okay, how much transaction fees have you generated? Because I mean that's very one-to-one. But I would even go a step further, like show cross-pollination from your protocol to other protocols across the ecosystem. Show composability, of your app and other apps. There's so much potential there that like protocols can easily tap into. Like if I'm doing it for synthetics, which a little bit of a biased one, right? But anyway, let's say I'm doing it for synthetics here. I can very easily point to transaction volume, protocols building on top of it, the open source nature of the protocol, TVL that's migrated here, builders, and so on. Like you can very easily lay out that picture. And if you're already here and you're already building, that will be relatively simple for you, depending on the types of data engineers that you have on Dune and in your dashboards and things like that. So I would just say spend a lot of time building out proper dashboards to make it really simple to see the impact that you've delivered to Optimism. Because if you've already delivered it, you've already done the hard part. From here, it's actually just displaying it out to people so they can actually understand what your impact looks like, from the past. And then, they can kind of see, how that will continue into the future.
Sick. You heard it. You heard it here first. Everything you need to do is provide us the links and resources to where we can find your impact for on-chain builders. That's your on-chain contracts. Cool. I thought we can chat a bit about what you guys are hoping to see in future iterations of the retro funding program. Small brain, maybe you have been part of 2 retro funding rounds thus far, so you've seen the iterations go. We're on to the next one. If or like, what would be a thing that you're hoping for, or that you hope for the most when we check in a year of what has changed about the retro funding program?
Yeah, this is maybe like the obvious canonical take too, which is like, I think like in previous year, well, okay, I think like retro PGF2, honestly, I don't know deeply like the criteria voters use, and I didn't even know deeply like how voting was done in both rounds. But I think like the correction from vibes to hard metrics is what happened between like these last 2 rounds, right? And I think like one thing, and it's good to see, honestly, I like the granularity, like I like the experimentation. I think like we'll see it correct to like the optimal point in the next coming years, because I think whereas a lot of like I really like this coming round because I happen to meet the criteria, and I'm like I like that the criteria hard, and that like solves for a lot of BS. But like there are people like Supercast. I saw that thread that Woj posted where it's like Supercast is like a great product, like clearly driving a lot of transactions and value for the Superchain collective, and does not meet the criteria because of like smart contract requirements, right? And so like I'm interested to see like where like how the pendulum swings back in previous rounds, in future rounds, to kind of find that optimal point.
Finding the balance between cold hard metrics and vibes.
Exactly.
I like it. Cool. Brian, what are your thoughts? What would you like to see in future retro funding rounds?
I share a similar sentiment in that I'm a big fan of the on-chain metrics approach for obvious reasons. One worry that I have is in a post-484 world, to drive transactions is actually very cheap. You're talking, cents to drive transactions rather than used to be $1 or so. Which there's basically the more that we incentivize metrics, the more we incentivize spam in some sense. And so it becomes quickly a question of quality rather than quantity. And obviously, defining quality on blockchains is one of the most difficult questions in the entire space. And so I think I do like the approach with round 4, in which those weightings are kind of opaque and trying to figure out how debt holders decide on what that quality actually is, what the right weightings are. And so I think that will be the biggest thing for the community to figure out is what is the actual definition of quality. It's kind of a more limited scope on what's definition of impact. Of course, you can drive quality users or quality participants, but what does that actually mean in sort of a more now version of impact? So I think that's the exciting discussion to be had.
Definitely. I would even add, right, like besides incentivizing transactions that are fairly cheap to do, what we actually want to do is reward people for bringing these great humans to optimism. But then we walk into the age-old Sybil problem of how do we actually know who the humans are? So it seems like there are a lot of like rabbit hole problems that we should really lean into. Zach, I know you're also cooking on some fun retro funding experiments on the side. What are your thoughts? What would you like to see?
Yeah, I mean, what I like most about retro funding is the variety of projects so far that have been rewarded, right? I can't necessarily speak up to art. I cannot necessarily speak up to 4 because we're still in the middle of even applications. But I think the I don't know, just like the variety that you see before RGPGF. So I ran some hackathons and whatnot on Ethereum, kind of like circa 2018, 2019. And there was like some pretty like standard flavors in terms of like what people were building. Kind of like it was DeFi protocol. Usually it was just like some variation of DeFi protocol, which is good, right? Like I'm a big fan of how a lot of these projects have been built, big fan of synthetics, Uniswap, etc. But then like I have to ask myself, is that the only type of application that should be successful on chain? And I've been here for a while. I hope that's not the case. I hope that we could bring the entire world on chain in a really broad variety of ways. I think if we don't, then we're kind of we're not delivering on the potential of the technology and kind of like the future that we all want to kind of build towards. So that's something I really like about RGPGF in general, is just the ability to incentivize different types of experiments, kind of like what Small Brain Games was saying, right? In that like there is no like clear go to market handbook. It encourages experimentation. It allows for those, it allows for like a whole bunch of different new experimentation in a way that really I don't think the ecosystem is going to incentivize, or wasn't really incentivizing beforehand. I think that's why you see so much interest around it, which I think is really cool. And then also, like to your point, right, like already experimenting on other optimism things. I think that RGPGF being kind of like a gateway into the optimism ecosystem has been really powerful. I had experimented with optimism, but again, mostly on DeFi, mostly just to kind of like try things out. But kind of going through retro funding and kind of being exposed to sort of the broader optimistic collective and Superchain, et cetera, is a really powerful way to think about what else is necessary in building kind of like the different bridges and not literal crypto bridges, but like kind of like the ways in which all of these different infrastructure and projects kind of connect is really powerful and really kind of, I don't know, supercharges my imagination at least. So those are some of the things I've really liked about it so far. And I just want to plus one kind of small brains statement in terms of like seeing, we're clearly correcting on the side of on-chain. I'm going to be really curious to see how we continue to keep the ecosystem vibrant in a way that isn't, easily syllable or gameable, I think is going to be like a really interesting challenge moving forward.
I fully agree that it's sometimes easy to lose faith. If we're looking at the 100th meme coin season, but then you look at base paint and boost and synthetics and small brain, then you feel great again. So yeah, we hope retrofunding can support this. I thought, Matt, I know you probably have deep thoughts and like spicy takes on this. That's why I saved you for last. I expect spicy takes, but don't hurt our feelings, okay?
No, I mean I think my spicy takes have kind of expired a little bit. I think that the redesign has kind of pushed this in the right direction. Where like at first, like at the end of the last round, obviously there was a lot of spicy takes from like, the Velodrome folks, myself to various degrees, on-chain builders, right? But I think the core problem in prior rounds was that we were trying to like mosh posh too many projects into one, impact analysis session. And that's a massive problem. And it's not even a problem of like what the voters like or where they're focusing or whatever. It's just you're throwing so many types of projects into one area without like clear criteria that it becomes an issue of, I mean, like how do you stack these things up, against one another? So separating these out into like core clear areas of focus was one of the big things that I was like openly advocating for. And I think this is the best path forward, because if you do this, you then allow like open experimentation to trial with, okay, like yes, in prior rounds, folks that are driving the sequencer revenues and driving the users, developers, and so on, probably weren't adequately rewarded, right? But now we say, okay, we're doing a round just for these types of users. And then we're going to do a round for other types of users and other types of users, right? And that sort of focus, and then like laying out exact criteria is what this system really needed. Because it's difficult when you just say, okay, like determine impact based on like metrics that everyone decides their self on, right? Like the impacts that synthetic submits are obviously going to be very different than many other projects, like NFT projects or Supercast or whatever, right? Like all of these are valuable additions to the superchain, but just in their own way, right? Like I would like to bring everyone on chain as much as the next person, across various avenues. Like obviously our focus at Synthetics is all around DeFi and, derivatives and speculative side of things. And that's where like a lot of user attention has been in DeFi and crypto for years. But we want to go out of that. And the best way to really trial measuring impact for these different types of groups is splitting it up. And that's what happened. And, I applaud you folks at, at Optimism and the collective and so on for just continuing to experiment with governance, with these processes. There's a lot of, across all of DeFi, typically you institute governance and then that's it. Like, hopefully it works, right? And that like hopefully it works thing, it usually doesn't. You know what I mean? And the best part is that you have people on Optimism, the Optimism Collective, just to shout out like Justine directly. Like you have people that are dedicating so much time to analyzing what has worked and what hasn't across all of DeFi, and all of DAO governance, that we are going to perfect this and we are going to get the best system here at Optimism because we're open to change. And that's what I really love here. And that's what this next round is going to institute, across various different focus areas. So yeah, probably not as many spicy takes, but I am really happy to see what these next stages start to elevate and what types of users, are rewarded for their, for their impact across, various areas. So super excited on my end.
Amazing. Thank you for that. We're bullish too. It's nice to share in the excitement because I think there's a lot of good stuff coming up this year. I have one answer to Jonas's question as well. I know I'm not here as a panelist to answer questions, but I have an answer anyways. One thing that I'm really excited about for retro funding is how it will continue to expand horizontally as the superchain continues to expand horizontally. And so Optimism started as one single network, and now very obviously we're building the superchain, right? Like Optimism is this entire network. It is not just one single place. And retro funding has to evolve to support that. And so it's, I think, on the collective and on all of the collective's contributors and participants to help remind the broader ecosystem that contributions to any OP chain in the superchain are eligible for retro funding, whether that's for future dev tooling rounds, whether that's OP stack contributions that improve the developer experience on all of these different chains, whether that's on-chain activity on Mode or Base or OP mainnet or Zora, et cetera. And so it's, I think, just cool to watch the program grow along with the overall product and the product strategy. And it just also welcomes a lot of other folks into the fold. So I'm excited to see how that plays out. Jonas, we got a couple questions from the chat. I think there's one juicy one about the voting experience that I would pass over to you, and then maybe we can close on the nitty-gritty details of this round. Does that sound good?
Cool, sounds good.
So one of the questions that came up was, is there a scoring system for different kind of activities on chain, like onboarding X people or creating dashboards or other types of things you can do on chain? Like how do we map those specific metrics, if we're talking about metrics driven voting, to the actual reward of retro funding?
Yes, there is. So our friends at Open Source Observer are spending a lot of energy to essentially create the scoring system. And what's really unique here is the badge holders will be the actual ones scoring, right? So they will have the choice out of like a large array of metrics to decide what they find valuable and what types of behavior they want to reward retroactively and kind of incentivize for the future. If you want to learn more about it, there is this retro funding category on the Optimism Governance Forum, and you will find out all about it there.
Amazing. Yes, retro funding category on the governance. And where's the governance forum?
gov.optimism.io.
Cool. And sorry, you were going to say something else?
Yeah, we're heavy into shouting out the URLs today.
I'm sure there'll be a link somewhere. And then last question to close this out. What's up with retro funding 4? How do I sign up? How do I get involved? Where do I go to find out? I'm hype after this live stream. What's my next action?
Next action is maximize your on-chain impact, and then follow Optimism channels. There's also a newsletter that you can sign up for to get notified when the sign-up launches for this round. So that will be May 23rd, and then sign-up will be till June 6th. Don't miss out. Don't miss out. Hit the bell icon if you want to. That's the type of commitment we're looking for.
Oh, sign up starts on May 23rd, and Twitter and or newsletter, both great ways to keep up to date on that. All right, any closing thoughts or wisdom before we say goodbye and thank you to our lovely guests? Screams of encouragement, shouts of hype, all good?
That was fun.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your participation in this ecosystem. Appreciate hearing y'all's thoughts. See you across the collective.
Sweet. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Peace, y'all.